Now, with your love of literature, it one of the biggest examples of like parts, sticking out to me, is Bilbo in the beginning of The Hobbit, with his Tookish side and his Baggins side, um, sort of going head to head over what he's gonna do. What do you think about Tolkien's sort of possible use of parts in that?
Yeah. You know that once you bring up Tolkien, we'll be talking about that the rest of the time, right?
That that's all right. How
Yeah, I like that. Actually, I hadn't quite thought of Bilbo and the Tookish side and the Baggins side, but that makes a lot of sense. That he was so thoroughly a Baggins, a comfortable Baggins at the beginning, and some other part inspired him to get up and leave that morning. He almost didn't, but he listened to one part of him. So I like that. The Tookish part basically said, "No, you're going to miss out, or you've got to go," and he goes running out, right? And so I
Mhm.
love that. And in fact, his journey, right, like any journey, hero's journey, is about discovering one's parts, especially parts of the self that we didn't we never actualize very much, right? So Bilbo learns a lot of bravery. He learns a lot of, like, he has to be courageous. He also learns, you know, his integrity. Like, he learns about what it means to sacrifice even for the greater good. Like when he chooses the whole thing with Oakenstone or whatever, the Thorns,
Oakenshield.
Oakenshield. Thank you. It's been a while.
Yeah.
And he chooses, defies Thorin, but he does that, for this greater good. I mean, look at the nobility of that, and the self. And he didn't mind that this was gonna. He could be killed for that, and he was willing to do that. That's a radically different Bilbo than we saw at the very beginning, right? So lots of parts of Bilbo were allowed to emerge in that process. So I love it. Um,
Yeah, it's crazy, and he does it. He battles those two sides, or two parts, throughout the entire book. So it's not like it's not like the Baggins, the comfortable side, goes away. It comes up when he's feeling cold, or when there's not much food around or something like that. He sort of wants to not be. He wants to not have chosen the path he chose.
mhm. Yeah, yeah, it's fascinating. Another thing that's just occurring to me is the ring, and the ring is such an amazing, right, metaphor for all sorts of things. But when he gets so Bilbo discovers the ring, and it saves him. It saves him from being eaten by Gollum. It saves him on multiple occasions with the spiders and with the wood elves and on and on. And so it was a good for him, but we learn right later that the ring in fact is an evil presence. So the ring can take you over and consume you and try to rule through you and all this. So we find that out, of course, in the Lord of the Rings. But I think that's interesting because our parts are good intentioned, and there's a specific type of part. We sometimes call it a firefighter part because it kind of comes in to save us when there's something, when the system's overwhelmed by some strong emotion. But it doesn't, like a fireman, it doesn't really care, like, about your house. Like, it doesn't care about your windows or your carpets. It just goes in and puts out the fire. So there can be a destruction that comes afterward. Well, but if you think about a firefighter part as being like, sometimes comes in and like, I'm going to stop the pain by binge drinking alcohol or doing drugs, or I'm just going to stop the pain by isolating from everybody, or playing video games for 20 hours, or pick a thing, right? It's like whatever it is, and it works, and it will stop the pain. It will in some ways help you cope. And so the ring worked for Bilbo. So for that whole book, the ring saves him. He uses it. He copes with he uses it to
Mhm.
cope. And we use lots of things to cope. And sometimes the things are in and of themselves, they're neutral, but sometimes they're just helpful. But when we overuse, right, or or they become the way that we just cope with life all the time, then it consumes us, like we see what happens in Lord of the Rings and what could happen to Frodo, but what did happen to Gollum, right? It by over dependence on it, it changes it changes you into being something that you don't even recognize. So I just
It's interesting that it is a coping mechanism, and it really is in that sense that without it, Frodo feels like empty, uh,
Mhm.
or at least he feels unprotected, or and the movies does this very a lot. When in the movies, if Bilbo doesn't know where the ring is, he freaks out, and wants to find it. I can't
Right.
remember if that's exactly true in the book, um, that adds to sort of the coping mechanism aspect of it. Uh, and also, I mean, there's something crazy also going on with Gollum and Smeagol as well. I don't
Mhm.
know if is that. Do you think that would be like full blown multiple personality disorder? I would assume, or is that something else?
I mean, I don't know that it would be necessarily has to look at it as DID, like multiple personality, only because I think Smeagol and Gollum know about each other, and they almost go back and forth between each other and speak in most of the time in DID. You have a part that there's amnesia to what that part is doing, so you don't even
Hmm.
remember. Like, it's a pretty extreme, right? It's a pretty extreme disorder on this continuum. And most people, when I'm talking to them about parts, they're like, does this mean I have like multiple personality disorder? I'm like, no, we all have parts. But if it's DID, then you may have parts that are actually not aware of other parts. So you've compartmentalized your system so much that if a part is like in charge, so to speak, or in the executive for 3 hours doing things that, and then you don't even remember what you were doing for those like so that's such an extreme. So I don't even know that that was true for Smeagol and Gollum. Now, we didn't I'm remembering more of the movie. I'd have to go back and look at the books because I've read them like 5 times, but it's been a while.
Hmm.
And sometimes you see the movie more often, and then it all blurs. But they
Yeah,
at
I
least,
agree.
yeah, at least in the movie, it does seem like whoa, this is the first time we're realizing the double dimension to Gollum, and the he literally has an inner conflict that he plays out. Do I am I nice to the hobbits? Am I not nice? Do I kill them? Do I not? And and then he makes a choice. So that really is that inner conflict that we see all the time with our parts, and we end up making some kind of choice. And sometimes it seems like we're making the good choice, like he's very cooperative. But also, what's brilliant in Lord of the Rings is that it's his trauma that causes it to be even worse. So, like, Gollum is tortured, right? He's tortured originally and by the Dark Lord, and then later when he is captured by Faramir, and by his guards, he's like, it triggers his trauma. So he
If I'm
now,
not mistaken, just for all the book movie people, if I'm not mistaken, that's I think mainly movie thing.
okay,
Uh, but I could be wrong about that too. I just remember that Faramir was made more like not as nice of a guy in the beginning, but he is in the book, I think.
uh,
Anyways, but yes, continue with what you're saying.
yeah, and again, it's been a while. I have to look, but the fact is, the interesting thing, at least in the movie, is that you have Gollum being triggered by his trauma, which then tips him right over the edge of the dark side of the dark part, whatever the Gollum part, taking over completely. He will never trust the hobbits now, right? And that was triggered by trauma, which is kind of cool to me because that's what my book is about. Is like dealing with post-traumatic stress and how we understand our traumas and why we make choices that we do sometimes. So yeah, Gollum is just, to see Gollum playing out in a movie is like watching parts where it come alive. Like that is so amazing.
He needed your book.
Yeah. Well, yeah. He
Uh,
didn't. Tolkien was already brilliant. He understood the human person so well.
no, Gollum did.
Oh, Gollum. Oh, yes. Thank you.
Sme
Yes,
Yeah, that he
definitely.
needed, it to heal him, to help heal him. But also with the ring, uh, Gollum also hates the ring, but also it basically put himself or put the ring above everything else as well at the same time.
Yeah. No, that's true. Um,
Is there a sort of a element of parts in there? Does that make
well,
sense for parts?
I see the ring as the burden. So the burden is that it is something that on one hand you want desperately, compulsively, and the other hand, it actually is destroying you. And so you have parts that recognize that it's destroying you, and you have other parts that desperately want it and will do anything for it. So that creates this dilemma. And I think if you look at, say, if you looked at the Lord of the Rings as like a macrocosm of the inner person, so then we all have an inner Aragorn, we all have an inner Gandalf, we all have an inner Frodo and an inner Sam and an inner Pippin and whatnot. And so if that's the case, then we have a part, or an inner Gollum. So we have a part, the inner Gollum part is going to be like, you know, he just wants, he's just going after what he wants no matter what, and he could kill the rest of the system for it, kind of, if he's stays burdened. But we have, like, between, like, you see Frodo and Sam, like Frodo is the part that is sort of noble and obviously wants to do the right thing, but he's also sort of weak, and at certain points, physically weak at least and stuff. And so in the end he fails morally at the very end. He doesn't do, he is vulnerable to the ring, and at the very end he almost, right. But look at the part that's Sam. Like, we have parts that are helper parts that are self-sacrificing, that are loyal, that are noble, and this kind of thing. So we see Sam carrying Frodo sometimes. So we recognize in that model, like, our our parts are needed to help and support each other. Our inner system is designed to help itself. And I would argue, maybe, I don't know, I have to think about this a little bit, but I would almost argue that Aragorn is a little bit like the core self. And why I say that is a little bit, you have to stretch the analogy a bit, it can be tricky, but he's a little bit like that, because when we meet him as Strider, he doesn't know who he is, right? We're wondering who he is and this kind of thing. It takes us a while to realize he's actually the king.
Mhm.
He's actually the king, and it takes him a long time to actually take the role of king. And once he does, I mean, man, he's able to accomplish so much, right? And he turns everything around, but he has to own who he is. And I think that's true of our inmost self. I think in general, our inmost self is kind of clouded over, maybe with sin or whatnot, by other parts that are dysregulated, that are kind of taken over, if you will. They're sort of, I think of it like an eclipse. Like, if the inmost self is the sun, and you've got parts that kind of eclipse the sun. It's there. It's not getting much light through. But so that's the same. Strider is like eclipsing that sun. And once he's revealed, I mean, that's who we are. And we are, in a way, like, I would say that our inner core represents both our inner king, our inner prophet, our inner priest, right? And
Mhm.
so we have, I don't know if you would call, I'm just speculating now, so I may change my mind, but I'm thinking on the fly that Aragorn is like that inner king, Gandalf is like the inner priest. Who would
I
be
think it's usually prophet.
prophet?
Uh,
Okay, and who would be the inner priest? I don't know
I
if that.
think Frodo is because he does the sacrifice part.
Oh,
I think
okay,
that's how it usually goes.
yeah, yeah, okay. No, that's cool to me. And so, yeah, so those parts all kind of represent it. They could represent at different times apart, but they could also represent the inner self. Yeah.